Welcome back to Between Drinks. I'm your host, Carol Griffin, here to share the stories behind your favorite drinks and the people and places who make them what they are. Last episode, we were in Edinburgh, making the case that blended Scotch whiskey is a lot more interesting than its reputation suggests. If you haven't listened to that one yet, go back. It's a good one. But for this episode, we're leaving the city. We're taking a ferry. We're taking a bus. And then another bus. We're landing on a small island 9 miles off the southwest coast of Scotland. About 3,000 people, a series of increasingly small villages, and a road that loops around the coastline. Plus 10 whiskey distilleries. This is Islay, and this is single malt. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, a slight detour on the, well, let's say unexpected pronunciations we find in this corner of the world. Not long after I started planning this trip, I was talking to someone from Scotland about all the places I was planning to go and getting his recommendations. And when I got to the island, I said, Islay? I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. And eventually I mentioned the whiskey part, and he goes, oh, you mean Islay. So yeah, even though it's spelled Islay, Islay is how it's pronounced. And this is because a lot of the names on Islay, the villages, and even the distilleries are rooted in Gaelic. So pronunciation can be unexpected, to say the least. One of the main reasons I wanted to go to the island is because I wanted to go to a distillery that makes a whiskey I really like. I had always been calling it Bruichladdich because that's how it's spelled, but it turns out that it's actually pronounced Bruichladdich. So yeah, I would not have gotten there on my own. Thankfully, I got a very helpful crash course on the rest of Islay's distilleries when I was sitting at a bar in Glasgow talking to a local who also loves whiskey. So shout out to Sam for making sure I didn't embarrass myself when I got there and started trying to order whiskey from some of these distilleries.
So you've got Bunnahabhain, Bruichladdich, Lagavulin. Now, I always say Cúil, but some people say Cúil. Bunnahabhain is something Bunnahabhain. So you're like put an intonation on the front part. Ardnaho, what is the other one? Bowmore is super easy. Yeah. Lafroig, Ardbeg.
Okay, an Ardbeg. Okay.
There you go. That's it. I think that's it for the island. Oh, Port Ellen. Is there any more? Am I missing one? I must be missing one.
It's so funny because you say some of them and I'm like, oh, I know exactly which one you're talking about. And then there was a couple where it took me a second to be like, oh, that one. Because it just sounds, so different than what I had been saying it
or
is.
Even stuff like a lot of their names literally mean like all of the Glen.
Yeah.
Glen means valley.
Oh.
And then, so like, for example, like Glenfiddich is Valley of the Deer. And that's why all their symbols are deers. And then you've got like Glen, and that's Valley of the Geese.
Okay.
Glenmorangie is Valley of Peace.
Oh.
Like, so whenever it says Glen, it means valley. So it's normally that name will mean valley.
And this is why we talk to people at bars. Here's the thing about Islay. By the time you arrive, you've already committed. There's no popping over from Glasgow for a few hours. The ferry takes about 2 hours each way, and the commercial flights, yes, there are flights, operate on a limited schedule, weather permitting. And once you're on the island, if you don't have a car, you're dependent on a bus schedule that I can only describe as sporadic. I don't drive, and I was too cheap to hire a driver for just me. So I spent a lot of time strategically planning around bus schedules and then just waiting around. But that's sort of the point of Islay. It's not a place you stumble onto. You go because you have a reason. And for a lot of people, that reason is whiskey. Specifically, single malt whiskey. The one with the prestige, the age statements, the dedicated shelf at the bar, the tasting notes that read like they were written by someone who spent too much time alone with a very good dram. It can feel intimidating if you're new to it. But here's the short version. Single malt means the whiskey comes from one single distillery and is made exclusively from malted barley. One place, one grain, that's single malt. Everything that makes it distinctive, the flavor, the character, the sense of where it comes from, is the product of the choices made inside those walls. In Islay, I was taking the bus everywhere, and I was just, just standing by a bus stop like, I hope this bus comes.
Yep, you've got a lot of trust in that, don't you?
Yeah. The amount of dirt roads I've stood on, just like, hopefully I'll get to a whiskey distillery at the end of this.
Yeah, you always make it eventually, don't you? Yeah.
That was Adam Hannett, master blender at Bruichladdich, aka the whiskey that made me sign up for this side quest in the first place. More on him in a minute. But first, why does a remote island of 3,000 people even have 10 whiskey distilleries? It's honestly an unreasonable ratio, even for me, but geography did most of the work. Islay had everything a distiller could ask for. Fresh water from its rivers and lochs, locally grown barley and peat, a lot of peat. The island basically handed early distillers their ingredient list. Before legal distilling was common, Islay's remoteness also made it ideal for those less than legal operations. It's an island after all, so it was hard for excise men to patrol and easy to move product by boat. And when the rules changed in 1823 to make legal distilling cheaper and more practical, a lot of that knowledge and infrastructure just converted over into licensed operations. Once a few distilleries were established, the island developed its own culture of distilling knowledge, coopers, maltsters, stillmen, and that kind of concentrated craft expertise is self-reinforcing. Over generations, it became a place where people knew how to make whiskey, which attracted more people who wanted to make whiskey. And when the peaty Islay style became a globally recognized category, something distinctive enough that people actively sought it out, that brought its own demand. Which brings us to peat. Peat is a type of soil made of decomposed plants, kind of like a precursor to coal, to put it really simply. You see, Islay is a windy, treeless island. Without forests, there is no wood to burn for heating homes, cooking, and yes, drying malted barley. And drying is a crucial step for any whiskey. So they used what they did have a lot of: peat. You see, when you burn peat, the smoke rises through the barley, drying it and depositing flavor compounds into the grains in the process. Those flavors survive all the way through fermentation and distillation, and this is what gives the whiskey its signature flavor: smoky, earthy, almost medicinal. It wasn't a stylistic choice at first, it was just what you did if you lived on Islay, but over time it became an identity, for Islay, but also somewhat for Scotch at large. Peat is measured in ppm, or parts per million. We're not going to dig into the science of it. All you really need to know is that it's basically just a read on how smoky a particular Scotch is.
Of course, at Bruichladdich, we are making Islay single malt, and Islay single malt is known around the world as being a peaty, kind of smoky flavor. However, at Bruichladdich, our Bruichladdich whiskey, the whiskey we make at Bruichladdich, is unpeated, so it's quite unusual. Basically, in 2001, when we reopened, in a conversation with the malting company who was providing us with the malt, we found that they produce like really super heavy concentrated malt that's like way above 40 ppm, and then they blend unpeated grain in there to make sure you can get that consistent. Each distillery maintains that you want 40, we'll always be able to give you 40. So rather than be reassured by that, Jim was incredibly excited to make whiskey from that really smoky stuff, the really concentrated stuff. And the malters said, no, look, we can't guarantee any consistency in that. It might be 200 one week, it might be 60 the next. It's just the wind, the conditions, the peat, the moisture, everything. I don't care, said Jim. I just want to make whiskey from it. And so Octomore was born. So Octomore is our third kind of whiskey brand, and it is super, super heavy peated. So we really pushed the boundaries of that.
Bruichladdich has three main expressions that really represent the impact peat can have on a single malt. Bruichladdich, their self-named Classic Laddie, as it's called, with the signature blue bottle, is unpeated. Port Charlotte is moderately peated at 40 ppm. And Octomore is just wildly peated. In fact, it's the most heavily peated Scotch in the world, at up to 309 ppm.
We kind of refer to it as the impossible equation, because it shouldn't work. With Octomore, we bottle a 5-year-old whiskey at high strength. We're bottling around about 58, 59% ABV, and it's also the ppm is, the highest we've ever done is 309.1 ppm. You think Port Charlotte's heavily peated at 40, so to go that level is incredible. But there's a 5-year-old whiskey that's so peaty it's going to be undrinkable. It's so strong, we're giving it to you at 59%, it's going to be undrinkable, and it's so young, because everyone knows that older whiskey is better. So it shouldn't work. But when you taste an Octomore, if you take your grain and you put it through that old mash tun, it's a long process. We ferment for, let's say, it's average about 72 hours. Some might be a bit longer, some might be a bit shorter. But it's the point is it's getting a long fermentation to develop flavor. And then we put it into the stills, and we're in no rush. We're not trying to make whiskey for the world. We're trying to make the best whiskey we can. It's not about volume. So that contact with copper, that purity, that slow distillation gives us an amazing fruity floral spirit to begin with. And then we use good casks.
Bruichladdich has been on Islay since 1881. It's Victorian in a literal sense. The original equipment is unusually well preserved, which tells you something about how they've chosen to operate. It sits right on the shore, and the views from the front door are striking enough that I spent a few minutes taking photos before I went inside, even though it was spitting rain and the wind rendered my umbrella completely useless. The modern chapter of Bruichladdich is where it gets interesting. You see, the distillery closed in 1994. The industry was contracting, and it was one of several Islay distilleries that went dark during that period. It sat silent for 7 years. Then, in 2001, a wine merchant and an entrepreneur bought it, along with 6,000 casks of aging whiskey sitting in the warehouses. Some of that stock went back to the 1960s. And at the center of the revival was Jim McEwan, one of the most celebrated figures in Scottish whiskey, a master distiller who'd grown up in the industry and brought both the craft knowledge and the credibility to actually make it work. What they built was deliberately anti-corporate, independent-minded, and vocal about things the broader industry wasn't really talking about at the time. Provenance, terroir, transparency about where the barley came from. They treated whiskey a bit more like wine, which made sense given who was at the helm. The result is the Bruichladdich we know today, a distillery with a distinct identity on an island full of them. And the person at the center of that story today is Adam, who you've already heard from. Adam is Bruichladdich master blender. In the context of single malt whiskey, master blender doesn't mean he's sourcing from other distilleries. That's a different conversation, and if you want it, it's in the episode before this one. Here, it means something different. It means he's managing hundreds of different casks that are all aging differently inside Bruichladdich warehouses, and deciding how to combine them into the final product. It's part science, part intuition, and a lot of patience. Adam grew up on Islay. He started at Bruichladdich as a tour guide before he was even really a whiskey drinker, and he worked his way through every corner of the operation. He eventually took over from McEwan. It's a lot to step into.
Yeah, I'm very lucky in that my parents moved to Islay in the very early 80s, but I think 1981, I think. So a few years before I was born. So I was born and raised in Islay, and I think, it's an incredible childhood. Like, it was so much freedom, beautiful place to grow up in. I'm so proud to be from here and love everything about Islay. It's a beautiful place. And actually, I can appreciate it more because I've got two kids, two girls, and raising them just now, here, it's just such an amazing place. When they can recognize birdsong, or they just like in touch with the island, the people of the place. It's a lovely thing. But yeah, growing up, I think you are surrounded by distilleries. Again, as I was growing up through the 80s and 90s, whiskey wasn't as kind of accessible, I suppose, as it is today. Even back then, distilleries were closed. So Bruichladdich was closed 94 till 2001. I beg much the same. There was, and the distilleries that were there weren't really visitor centres. They were whiskey factories. So there wasn't that same tourism, come in and see what we do. It was kind of starting, through the 90s, but so I wasn't really exposed to kind of whiskey that much, and my parents weren't big drinkers. They're both nurses, and really, growing up, your aunties and uncles and everyone would be around, and you'd be having a wee taste, and you get to dip your finger in a dram of something and have a taste when you were kind of 12 years old, and it would just put you off whiskey, because it was so, at that age, it's so strong, so kind of fierce, the flavors, that it wasn't for me. But as I grew up and you kind of start to learn a bit more about it, and to be fair, when I started working at Bruichladdich, again, I wasn't a whiskey drinker at all, really. As soon as I had people explaining it to me and seeing what was actually going on in terms of the production and what went into it and the passion, it was so much bigger than just that bottle of whiskey at the end, that when you get that, then you really appreciate that. I mean, we call it spirit. It's the spirit of the people and the place is in that liquid. I think it's called spirit for a reason. There's so many kind of human terms. Even like maturation. You think about a whiskey as it develops, as it ages in the cask, and how it changes and mellows. And you think about, again, as a youngster, got that energy and vitality, and you age and you round out, and you become more worldly wise. Hopefully, anyway. And I think that that's what whiskey kind of is, and you really appreciate those flavors. And lucky that over the last 20 years I've been working at Bruichladdich, I've been able to kind of working as a tour guide, so telling the story was a great start. And then working in the warehouse and mashing and distilling, and they get you to management and all of the times when, it was Christmas time and you needed to go and pack some bottles into cases in the bottling hole, and you do that. So you kind of see every aspect of the distillery. And then again, for the last 10 years, I've been kind of head distiller and just kind of promoted to master blender. So I suppose the experience I've had and from the bottom up has been really, really important to, again, the absolute love of whiskey I have now. It's such an important thing for Islay, for the people here, and a great way of bringing people together and, opening things up and having conversations. It's fantastic for that, and it tastes delicious too. So what more can you ask for?
One thing that became clear pretty quickly as I talked to Adam is that we're talking about time horizons very differently here than how I think people like you and I normally think about them. This is a guy who has spent 20 years at one company, going to work at the same place and spending a not insignificant amount of time planning stocks and blends for 5, 10, even 20 years out. Because whiskey can't be rushed. You do all this work to ferment and distill the grains, and you put it in a cask that you've carefully chosen, and then you wait. 3 years at minimum, but often much longer. The decisions you make today, you won't know if they worked for a decade. And the whiskey aging in Bruichladdich warehouses right now, some of it was made by people who aren't there anymore.
So my kids, when they watch TV, they put on Netflix or something, they always skip the intro. They can't even sit through the tune at the beginning, And I would say to them, like, listen, when I was little, I used to watch a program. If you wanted to watch the next episode, you had to wait a week till that came on at the same time again.
30 seconds.
Yeah, and this is it, but with all of that kind of thing, that instant nature of everything these days, there's something really refreshing about whiskey where a 3-year plan is really quick. And again, I'm sitting here at the laptop at the desk here, and I'm looking at actually the Port Charlotte whiskey range, and I'm out in like 2050 looking at what whiskey. So some of the whiskey that we haven't even made, how much whiskey do we need to make if we want to make these products at 2050? And I'm also going back, with Port Charlotte back to 2001, but when you're looking at Bruichladdich, you're going back to 1969 is the oldest stock we have. So you have this amazing span of time that you can't possibly, again, I wasn't around in 1969. I know I've got a few wrinkles, but it was well before my time. So when you've got that breadth of time and you think about, again, like the whiskey that was made at 2002, Bruichladdich or Port Charlotte, that was under the guidance of Jim McEwen, of Duncan McGilvery, the Stillman, some of these guys are retired now, and then the spirit we're laying down today, so I'm benefiting from that spirit. And then the spirit we're laying down today, somebody else will be putting that in a bottle. Hopefully I'll get to put some of it in a bottle, but it's that long-term thing, that legacy thing, that passing on, that history. It's being part of that just makes you think of it differently to the way the rest of the world kind of works. Is everything's so instant, when you have to lay down. And I think there's something really appealing about actually, drinking a 10-year-old whiskey. And we tend to think of 10 years old as kind of like a relatively kind of benchmark young whiskey, but 10 years, God, a lot happens in 10 years. But you try a 15 or a 20 or something like that, you think about when that was made and what people were thinking and how it was laid down, and passing on that story and that transition and laying on those casks is one of the fascinating things I think about whiskey. When you're involved in it, it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, logically, I knew all of that, but hearing you talk about it from the inside adds another layer to it, because it is like, I mean, you're talking about some like literal legends here, the no pressure, you have this stock of a couple decades and you're like, don't like, excuse my language, like don't fuck it up,
Believe me. I mean, that's one of the really helpful things that, so I remember like taking over from Jim, because Jim McEwen as a legendary distiller, amazing personality, just a brilliant guy, but larger than life. I remember, like, I've told the story a few times so what we would do in the mornings at the distillery. So back when Jim was here, when I got into management around the distillery, about 7 a.m, Jim would be in the office, and we'd all come in at 7 a.m, have a cup of tea and talk about the day. And there was one morning where Jim came in and he said, "I've got some news, fellas, I'm going to retire." And it was just, because of this routine of going in, sitting, having a cup of tea, working out what we're going to do for the day or the week. again, as long as I've been here, he'd been one of the founders, one of the guys who brought the distillery back to life. And when he said, that's me, I'm retiring, it was just this complete shock that, well, why would a man who's like nearly 70 retire? That's crazy,
Yeah, like how dare you retire and leave us here
Yeah,
to have tea without you? Like, what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he was. I think the passion, the energy that he brought, he wasn't an old man. Just the vitality he had is incredible. Is incredible. And but when he retired, he was kind of, that conversation when he kind of announced that, he was saying that, Alan, you're going to take over as production director, and Adam, you're going to take over as head distiller. And I was like, fantastic! What an opportunity! That's incredible. I wasn't ever what I was looking for. It was just that progression. I suppose that natural progression, and but there was that kind of thing. Is once you kind of go, this is it, fantastic. That's what I'm going to do, and then you start to realize the magnitude of that. Oh my God, I'm going to. And then there was that thing exactly. Say, don't fuck it up. We've built this thing for the last 15 years, and we're handing it over. So. Don't mess it up, And
I literally can't imagine that level of pressure or responsibility. My horizon is a month or a quarter, maybe a year. And even that often feels so incredibly long. But to literally spend your life making a spirit that you may not get to bottle, that you might not even get to taste one day, that's a different thing. And that responsibility or duty goes both ways, right? The folks of today, they've got to do a good job for the people that come after them. But the ones who come after, they've got to do right by the people who left them this gift. When I was on my tour at Bruichladdich, they walked us through the production process in detail, and I was struck by the scale and age of the equipment. When Adam calls Bruichladdich a Victorian distillery, he's not being hyperbolic. It's literally full of equipment from the 1800s. I mean, could you imagine if you were the person who broke something after all these years?
One of the things that I think we always kind of think about and still talk about it now is you just want to leave the distillery in a better place than you found it, and it's all about passing it on. There's moments where, and again, when I got into kind of management and take on the responsibility, there's a heavy responsibility there, but there's also these lovely moments where, on a Sunday afternoon, and there's no one else, the distillery's closed, no one else is there, everyone's away for the weekend, but you're there. And we used to kind of go up the stairs to the office, and you look across the courtyard, and there's these moments where you would kind of stand there and go, "Yeah, this is mine. This is so cool. Like, I'm the only one here. I'm in charge. This is so cool." And you do get these little kind of moments where you enjoy that responsibility, but it's always about passing it on to the next generation. You're only ever looking after it. It's not ever really yours. Everyone feels that, when you're a marshal or a stillman, and you're there Sunday night starting off before it's just the two of you there, the marshal and the stillman. That's your distillery at that point. You are the ones who are in charge. Or you're in the warehouse and you're rolling barrels where you're taking samples and like, yeah, I'm the guy in here. I'm doing this right now. So every one of us in this, of the 100 odd people who we've got here, they're all feeling that in their own kind of way, and that's what's special about it. Everyone's got a bit of ownership of it. Everyone feels attached to this distillery and these kind of four walls. And it's an amazing thing, the spirit we have in here. It captures all of that. It's a real sense of belonging. It's fantastic.
I got a very literal demonstration of this after my tour. The wind that had been battering the building all day knocked out the power, and the distillery had to close early, but my bus wasn't due for another hour. Thankfully, without missing a beat, my tour guide casually offered me a ride home. She was headed past my hotel on her way home anyway, she said, although I suspect that was maybe generous. We spent the drive talking about life on the island, and she dropped me at my door. It was a nice little bonus to the day, hearing about the day-to-day life from someone who's from the island, chose to stay, chose to make Bruichladdich part of her life, and casually offers people rides home when they need it. That's Islay.
So much of Scotch whisky, the barley's grown elsewhere, it comes into the distillery, it's distilled, and the spirit goes off somewhere else to be filled, and it matures in a different place and then bottled in these big kind of central belt of Scotland locations. It's actually only spent 3 days of its life, of its 10 years at the distillery when it was distilled. So from a point of view of actually being more authentic, being a bit more honest and going, well, if it's Bruichladdich whiskey, yeah, let's do as much as we can here. So we were lucky we had a lot of warehouse space, at the time. So when Bruichladdich was bought from White Mackay, there was about 6,000 casks here, that were bought along with the. In fact, Simon, who's one of the the founders, would often say that Bruichladdich bought the whiskey, the distillery came free because the condition of it was
Yeah.
so poor. But there was a lot of work to do to get up and running, but we had big warehouse space, so we could mature here. We didn't need to export it, but for the first couple of years, we were bottling, like we're sending it off to be bottled externally. So when we built the bottling hall, it kind of closed the loop, and it was, well, if we're bottling everything here, it means we can use Islay spring water, which we were actually in the early days sending water with the whiskey to go off and be bottled. So we were using Islay spring water, we were providing employment, and we were, of course, securing that maturation here. And actually, that's such an important thing because the warehouses we have here, I mean, we're right by the sea, right by the shore. So you've got Islay's a windy place. There's nothing between us and Canada stopping the wind coming in, It's just all coming in from the West Isles. So when you're in the warehouses and you've got this wind whistling through, and if you think about that idea of evaporation and the angel share, it's not a vacuum. There's something going in. The wood is porous, and there's that Islay air going in. So that's what's interacting with the spirit, along with the wood, along with the spirit. So it was really important to us to get that flavour in there, to get that kind of, you get this kind of minerality with Bruichladdich when you taste it, this lovely kind of light, fruity citrus, and then you get this kind of lovely minerality. It's like warm sand, on the beach. It's got that lovely kind of fresh, salty kind of minerality to it, and it's because the whiskey's matured here. Such an important aspect of shaping the spirit is the place, and it's the people. Because we are based here, the distillery, the whole operation is based on Islay. Apart from the finance team, we keep them out in Glasgow. So by the time they find out we've already spent the money, it's too late. So that's
they're playing right away. Yeah, they're that long ferry, and look, a ferry was canceled due to wind.
It's too late. We've done it. Never mind. But it's like the business is based here, and everything is here.
That wind, by the way, that closed Bruichladdich early, that sent my glasses flying across the street and my blanket scarf tangling around my head like I was in some kind of 90s cartoon. That same wind also canceled my ferry back to Glasgow the next day. This was especially funny because I had spent the last couple of days eating most meals at the only pub within walking distance with a rotating cast of old men who had lived on Islay forever and had a lot to say about the new ferry captain, who they thought was overly cautious with his cancellations. So when I got the cancellation notice the night before I was due to leave, I just had to laugh. So I grabbed one of the last seats on a small plane back to Glasgow and tried to be grateful for a 45-minute flight rather than an 8-hour ferry, bus, then train ordeal. I guess Islay keeps you as long as it wants to. That's just part of the deal. A lot of people think whiskey doesn't have terroir, and I know you feel very strongly that it does.
Indeed.
And so I would love to hear a little bit more from you about terroir and whiskey.
Oh, well, there you go. You're not busy the rest of the day, are you? This is going to be
No, great. I'll settle in. I got snacks. We're good.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, terroir is, if you think back to, I was talking about Mark Graney and Simon Coughlin, that the wine merchant that had been involved in, working with the greatest vineyards in Bordeaux. That's the world he lived in. And so when he started getting involved in whiskey, and there wasn't that same, don't get me wrong, I'm sure in wine there's people who just, grow grapes and ferment, don't put the same kind of thought in. But what you could see with whiskey was this amazing kind of cultural product, this amazing tradition, this skill, but the kind of demand for more and more whiskey over the years had led to more automation, more efficiencies, and it's almost got away from the origin of what whiskey was, where it was an expression of the land, of the soil, where effectively making whiskey was a way of preserving grain, and a way of paying your rent, and it was a way of, kind of celebrating the culture. It was, whiskey was really important, but it had become more of a commodity. And the barley that was grown, albeit in Scotland, was grown to be high yielding, to give the farmer a good crop, to give the maltster a good crop, to give the distiller a good yield. And while that is not necessarily a bad thing, flavour had been lost in many cases. It wasn't really talked about. And even today, a lot of distilleries don't talk about grain. They just don't.
Breaking in here to say that they literally don't, y'all. I visited a dozen distilleries in Scotland on this trip, and I've been to more than a dozen around the world. It's very rare that a brand offers up any info about their grains, about their malt, about any of the raw products that go into their whiskey. The focus is almost entirely on the barrel, with a little about the fermentation and the distillation thrown in. And I think this is part of why there isn't a lot of respect for whiskey as a product of terroir, because it usually isn't a product of the place that made it. At least not in the same way it is for, say, wine or mezcal, which is the love of my life and my particular alcoholic specialty. My expertise comes from that world, and so I'm just going to be completely honest here. I was skeptical about this idea of whiskey having terroir. But after talking to Adam, well, let's just say he makes a very convincing case.
It's such an important thing for us at Bruichladdich to focus on that, because when you think about most distilleries, or in fact think about how you make whiskey, it's barley, water and yeast, then you age it for a minimum 3 years. Like, that's in a nutshell how you make whiskey. So barley is where you get your alcohol, your flavor. It's the source of everything. So it's so important, but nobody really talks about it in the whiskey industry. I mean, for many years, the success of Scotch whiskey and this kind of global demand kind of led the barley breeders and the industry to focus on making as much as they could, because the demand was there, and the whiskey, the quality is so good. When you think about the craftsmanship, the skill, the tradition, the flavors, Scotch whiskey is absolutely fantastic. But to fill that demand, the quality of the whiskey didn't kind of suffer, if you like, but there wasn't the same emphasis on the flavor of the grain. It was about the yield, and over time, it's a gradual thing, but that's kind of what happened. So I think the opportunity for Bruichladdich when we reopened was, again, with Mark Rainier, with Simon Coughlin, with this kind of local kind of impact from Jim and obviously the rest of the team here, and wanting to bring Bruichladdich back to life and bring the community with us. It was very much about focusing on the ingredients, because that's what Mark and Simon understood was the quality of a wine. Therefore, in whiskey, well, surely you can make different flavors, but a lot of the conversation around whiskey was, it's grain's grain, barley's barley. It doesn't matter the variety. It's all going to give you the same thing. It's about the stills. It's about the copper. It's about the fermentation, all these kind of things. And so we set out basically to prove that barley equals flavor. And so we started in the early days. So 2001, we started distilling again. We were kind of setting things up, getting the distillery ready. And then 2003, we started using organic grain. So that was single farm from the northeast of Scotland. And so we were thinking about how it's grown and where it's grown. Whether you've got an old Victorian distillery, you want to use barley that's effectively from the same time, so you go back 60, 70, 80 years, people weren't using fertilizers. The farming was very, very different, and things just by nature were organic. So bringing that back in to kind of, right, well, let's focus on that, and let's focus on that single farm. You could taste the difference in the spirit, and then you could get that character coming through as the whiskey matured. 2004, we worked with our first Islay farmer to grow barley for us. And 2005, we actually didn't grow any Islay barley because everyone was hanging around to see how it was performing. Was it a success? And then obviously by that time, we'd kind of proved that it was too late to plant for 2005. So 2006 was the next distillation, 2007, and year upon year, it's grown and grown and grown. So we've gone from one farmer to about 20 farmers just now. And actually, the thing about that is that we get this different flavor. We get a different yield. We get a different, the soil is different. The conditions are different. The weather's different. And so we find that when we distill Islay farm, whether it's single farm or the culmination, we combine some of the farms together with some of the smaller growers to get the batch size big enough for malting. We find that there is a real difference in the flavor of the spirit that we produce.
This is actually the thing that surprised me most about this conversation. In mezcal, the relationship between the grower of the agave and the producer of the mezcal is central to everything. They're almost always the same person, and even when they're not, it's baked into the culture. So I didn't expect to find the same kind of relationship or logic operating here. But once you can prove that the farm shows up in the glass, you're on the hook for what happens on that farm. 20 farms on a small island, that's not just sourcing, that's a relationship. And Adam's clear-eyed about what that means.
Thinking about the flavor of the grain and where it comes from, that's really exciting. But you start to become aware of your influence as if we just want the highest yielding barley, then the farmers are going to work in a particular way to give us that. If we start looking for organic biodynamic, then we create that market and it becomes something there. And actually with the biodynamic in particular, what's really interesting as a whiskey distiller is you start to get this amazing kind of insight into agriculture. And this guy down in Wiltshire, this biodynamic farmer, Richard Gantlett, he's amazing. His farm sequesters 10 times more carbon into the soil than his farming activity emits. He doesn't rely on monocrop. He's rotating, he's mixing crops, he's doing things. So the biodiversity of this farm, like, it's just good after good after good. So, if we're supporting that, it's all part of the really good stuff. So we start off thinking about flavor. We kind of prove that to ourselves. And then as we take it forward, it becomes more about that community, that agriculture. So you really realize that responsibility you have, not just to make good spirit. That's number one, of course. But alongside that, we have to be good partners. We have to be good stewards. We have to be thinking about our community. So, even actually Wednesday night, we had a session with a couple of agronomists. We invited, through the distillery, we'd kind of built these contacts with a couple of really good agronomists, really experienced guys, to be able to then pass that on to the growers here to help them look after their soil, help them look after their rotations, help them look after so many things. They don't have to take the advice. It's there if they want it, but we want to support as much as we can. And it's really interesting to learn more about.
You're becoming like part farmer over here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Learning so much more about crops than I'm sure you ever expected to when you became a tour guide.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the thing. And it leads you off into these different roads, but you realize how important it is to do what we do. And we talk about sustainability, again, passing things on for the next generation. If our distillery is not being a responsible partner in terms of the farming, then the farming collapses and then we collapse as well. So it's really important to help support the right decisions.
20 years of thinking this way eventually produces something you can hold in your hand. In 2025, Bruichladdich released a whiskey called Old School, built around exactly the approach Adam just described. Islay-grown barley only, youngest whiskey in the bottle is 10 years old, and every farm that's grown for them going back to 2004 is listed by name.
It's 25 years this year, which for us is a bit of a milestone, and we just need much of an excuse for a party, but thinking that we've celebrated 25 years since we reopened, and Bruichladdich through its history has opened and closed many times, so this is a really nice period of stability and something for us to really celebrate. And although I've been here for I started in 2004, so I was at 22 years, not since day one, but
pretty close.
Pretty close. But I think it's something that is just really fun to celebrate. So the whole year we've got, releasing different whiskies that just celebrate a lot of things we've done and we do. So every year, the whiskey festival, every distillery in Islay has an open.
It's on my bucket list. I'm coming.
Yeah, you've got to come. You've got to come. Let us know when you do come. What we do at Bruichladdich in the morning is we have a masterclass, a big masterclass. This year's, so it's like a tasting of 250 people usually. This year it's going to be much bigger.
Oh, okay.
We've got a bigger venue. We're just putting a roof on it now.
You literally had to build your own venue.
Well, no, it's a warehouse that we needed to do. The racking in it was very old, so we need to take the casks out. Hopefully going to be done in time for the festival. But like some of the people have been really important over the last 25 years, usually it's just me speaking and doing the tasting, but we'll get there's some amazing stories, some fantastic stories that you wouldn't believe them unless you hear the person actually standing there telling you, this is what happened. So
I'm sure every hotel room in Islay is already booked, but you're making me want to plan a trip. Yeah.
I mean, they probably are just now, but you know what? Bring a tent with you and, pitch up. You'll be welcome. So I think that's probably the big thing, Caro, is 25 years for us. Loads of cool stuff coming out, big celebrations, and just trying to get some fun in there. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, no, totally. Has been on my bucket list. I'm like, okay, it's crawling up even further.
Well, listen, when you make it over, get in touch. We'll probably make you work, actually. It'll be behind one of the vans.
That sounds fun. Yeah, put me to work. Yeah.
Just be careful what you wish for, because again, there was actually a guy called Koichi from Japan, 2006. He came along and he wanted to go around every distillery in Scotland, and he'd done a few, and he got to Bruichladdich, and then Jim got a hold of him, and he stayed working with us for 6 months until his partner said, "Look, you better come home now, or we're done." That's it. Yeah.
And this is how I moved to Islay.
You'll be in there in no time. Yeah.
I did not make it to the 25th anniversary party, to my serious disappointment, but I'm now taking signups for people who want to come with me next year. Don't worry, we won't take the ferry, but you may have to find your own way home. If Adam's threat to put me to work has any truth to it, I might just stay. It sounds like Bruichladdich has that effect on people, and I think I understand why. Because underneath all of it, the warmth, the community, the sense of belonging Adam talks about, there are a lot of deliberate choices. Choices that might cost more, take longer, and make the logistics harder, but ones that feel worth it.
One of the great things when Remy Cointreau bought the distillery back in 2012, they're a family company, and they They haven't changed anything about what we do. They've just enabled us to do it faster, bigger, better, So we were building warehouses on little bits of land that we had and trying to do it on a kind of shoestring budget. Whereas when Remy Cointreau came in, look, this is long term. They have 100-year-old cognacs. They're a 300-year-old business. They understand that long term kind of aspect. So if you're going to build warehouses, build big stone warehouses that are going to be there in 100 years. So that's what we've been doing, with their investment, which is incredible. But a huge part of that is bottling, that commitment to bottling on Islay. Because again, if you think about actually the logistics of bringing in all your empty bottles to Islay and then filling them here and then shipping them away around the world, that's extra cost, extra time, extra everything. It's much easier to do what every other distillery does, just ship it off. So when some whiskey is matured on Islay, some distilleries mature more than others on the island, but a lot of it is distilled. It's filled into a tanker and it goes off and it matures in a big, massive warehouse complex next to the bottling hall, so everything is logistically easier. And do you know what? It's fine. It's still great whiskey. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But for us, it's just the way, it's just that Bruichladdich thing. It's that way we do things at Bruichladdich. It's about authenticity. It's about provenance. It's about that sense of place. And for us, it has to be Islay. It has to be done here. So there's so many things that we do that financially don't make sense. Our whiskey is more expensive than most competitors, But I think when you start to break that down into how we make our whiskey, why we make our whiskey, it's not a race to the bottom, for us. It's not about the lowest price we can possibly do it. It's about the best value we can get. So actually, when you think about, it is more expensive, but, we're bottling at 50% ABV.
Yeah.
There's less dilution, less water we're selling you, and more whiskey, and you can adjust that as you want, but we feel that's where it sits best.
Yeah.
The quality of the wood, the amount of people, again, it's people, not machinery. There's nothing automated here. We're operating a Victorian distillery in effectively the same way as we used to. I was doing a tour the other day and we were talking about the strike temperature, when we put the water in, and I said, it's 149 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
And in the UK, nobody talks in Fahrenheit. Nobody knows what a Fahrenheit is. Everything is in Celsius now. So we've always worked in Fahrenheit. So as every mashman gets trained, they're told 149 degrees Fahrenheit.
And in their head, they're like, okay, I'll Google it later.
Because the gauges that you're putting the water in, the temperature gauges are in Fahrenheit as well. It all works.
That's so funny.
So
it's just like this random group of Scots who know Fahrenheit.
Yeah, it is. There's like 6 people on this remote island who understand Fahrenheit. Yeah, but it's just little things like that it's those peculiarities, those things. I mean, it's just a tiny little thing, but it's done by people, and the skill is passed on to generation. People are trained. There's no. Yeah. It's not about. I was going to say like following the rule book. Of course, we have procedures and we have things we need to do and we know how to make whiskey, but it's about people. There's that human element in there. And I think that's really, really important to actually shaping the spirit. It'd be cheaper if we just did it by machinery. We had one operator running the whole place from a computer, but we don't. We have people and they're able to respond to the changes they see in the barley or the changes in the way that, you hear the mill isn't running quite right. The sound's different, therefore you can adjust it. You go into the tun room and you can smell, it was different to last week and it's a different grain we're using this. It's just little things like that is so important in making whiskey that I think we're really proud of. And yes, it does push the cost of what we do up, but ultimately it's about the value. It's about the preservation of heritage, of history. If you just bring it down to the how cheap you can sell it, it's not for us. That's not our game.
Yeah, that's not a game I'm trying to play. And if we want cool stuff to exist, we have to pay for the cool stuff.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And this is it. And again, I know at times like this, when the cost of living for everyone is going up, and whiskey is a luxury in some ways. But actually, if you're a whiskey drinker, if that's your passion, that's your kind of thing, and you sit down, you enjoy a dram. You want that to be as good an experience as you can. You work hard, you go out, you earn that money, and then you come home, or you want to be sharing something with your friends and enjoying that moment. You want something special, and that's what our whiskey's for. And actually, one of the great privileges for me is when I do travel and you do meet people who it's a really special thing for. Or a couple of years ago, my family and I, we were going away on holiday, so we stayed in Glasgow one night, and then we were flying out the next day. As we were having breakfast, there was a guy who came over and said, I was wearing a Bruichladdich, and he came over and he said, do you work at Bruichladdich? And I said, yeah, I do. Yeah. He said, oh. And we got chatting, and this guy was from the US, and his friend who loved black art had passed away, and they had a bottle of black art that he had wanted them to drink, and they wanted to drink it at Bruichladdich in memory of their friend. And you think, like, that, what an amazing thing, just because of these guys have traveled to the other side of the world in respect to their friend who passed away, but because of the whiskey he loved from Bruichladdich. And you think that's just absolutely incredible.
I literally have chill bumps. That's such an amazing, that's a story you want to be a footnote in.
Exactly that. Like that doesn't need us to do anything, but to know that whiskey meant so much to those people, and their friend, there was, it's really humbling, and it's a privilege.
Stories like this get me every time. Those guys flew to the other side of the world to drink a bottle of whiskey in memory of their friend. That's not a small thing. That's a life organized around the love of a particular dram and a distillery that meant enough to someone that it became part of how he was remembered. I said in the last episode that my attitude with good drinks is respectful but not precious. Every pour doesn't have to come with a ceremony. But it's worth remembering sometimes what goes into what we're drinking. The stillmen who learned Fahrenheit and passed it on. The 20 farmers growing barley on Islay because someone asked them to. The cask from 1969 that was filled by someone who will maybe never get to drink it. The woman who gave a stranger a ride home through a storm because the distillery had to close early and the alternative was standing in the rain for an hour. I only spent like 2.5 days on Islay, but I ate most of my meals at the local pub alongside a rotating cask of old men. I got rained on, I lost power, I missed my ferry and had to catch a flight, and I was reminded of something I keep learning on these trips. The more remote the place, the more helpful the people. There's a kind of generosity that comes from actually needing each other. So get on the ferry when you can, or just find a bottle made by people who genuinely care what went into it. Thanks to Adam Hannett, master blender, Islay native, and now the person most responsible for making a non-driver like me seriously consider an extended stay on a remote island. Everything from this episode is in the show notes at betweendrinks.co/single-malt. If you want more Between Drinks in your life, the newsletter is where I keep the conversation going between episodes, what I'm drinking, where I'm going next, and the occasional trip I'll be taking small groups on. So if you want to come with me on one of those, that's where to sign up. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you for the next episode. We're going to be diving even further into the great drinks coming out of Scotland.